block of meeting, no public meetings. So I hope none of you have been to China recently, none of you are sniffling or in other ways unwell. Mike and I are going to stand close to the front just in case you are
away.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Adjunct Professor Michael Barton, who's known to many in the radiation oncology community, one of our most distinguished leaders, trained at Westmead under Alan Lamans many years ago, then moved to Liverpool, where he subsequently founded the Ingham Institute Research Institute and was its director for the initial period. Now has a different role there now. You stepped down from being director of the institute, or are you still?
Yes, no, I've definitely stepped down.
But
So I'll correct this biography in my first one.
Yes, Michael was talking a great many things. He's been very involved in international organisations, in education, very involved with the basic science of oncology course, whereby our registrars learn the basic sciences related to oncology, has taken that up overseas in multiple languages, working with the International Atomic Energy Agency to provide distance education as well as practice, as well as on-the-ground education for people all over the world. He works with translated into many languages, and you travel into many different countries. And he's going to talk to us today, really an overview of radiotherapy, talking about why we need it in the world, what it's doing in the world at the moment, where technological advances are taking us, as well as some of the work being done at the Ingham Institute in Liverpool, as well as collaborative work with many other centres in Sydney, and some exciting ideas we have for the future to make sure radiotherapy is still a valid option for cancer treatment for many years to come. So there's a lot to tell us, so Michael, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. I was in fact trained at Prince Alfred.
Oh, yes, you were.
And I worked here at Prince of Wales for about 3 years with Professor Smee and others, and then went to Westmead and finally settled in Liverpool to set up a cancer outcomes health services type research unit. And then for about 10 years, I was Director of Research for South West Sydney, and as Michael said, built the Ingham Institute. So I was asked to give this talk a couple of years ago, so I think this still holds. It's very difficult to make predictions about the future. David Goldstein assures me that the radiotherapy's only got about an 11-month life expectancy. And I think with these guys around, I wonder about all our futures. But the short answer is yes, of course, we will need radiotherapy. And you can all go home now and stop worrying about the person next to you who's coughing. But what I want to show you is why that's the case, how much, where, and what it might look like in 20 years' time. So we've done a lot of work. For many years, we were originally asked by the Commonwealth Government, how much radiotherapy does Australia need? What are the indications for treatment? How common are all those indications? So we had a project that eventually published, I think, 10 papers in cancer and 1 in Lancet Oncology, and a PhD that was about 700 pages long, answering this question and setting a benchmark that about half of all cancer patients need radiotherapy at least once in the course of their illness, either not because you could give it, but because you should, because it's the treatment of choice. Of that 48%, 34% it's for cure and 14% for palliation. But again, because it gives a better outcome. In Australia, currently this would result in about another 13,500 people having their cancers controlled locally, and saving about 3,500 lives a year if everybody got access to the treatment that they needed. And because we have this big, I'll just go back one slide, because we have this big precision tree of which you can see a tiny fragment, we can then add to that decision tree what are all the survival and local control benefits. And we can work this out for every type of cancer, and both for local control and survival. And interestingly, it's those cancers, cervix and head and neck, that are common in the lower middle income countries where the greatest benefit is. So because we've got this ability to work out the different benefits from two different cancer sites or in different cancer sites, we can then adjust this benchmark from country to country to see who has the greatest need, how much cancer services they need, particularly how much radiotherapy they need. And we have looked at chemotherapy as well, and more recently just looking at surgery. So we used our radiotherapy model in this global task force for cancer control, radiotherapy for cancer control, probably the worst acronym I've ever come across. The one I have the most difficulty remembering. But it looked at what was the investment case if everybody around the world could get access to radiotherapy for their cancer when they needed it. Basically, about 7 million cases of cancer need radiotherapy now. It's projected there'll be 24 million cases of cancer in 2035, a little bit more than that in 2040, so that's my 20-year mark. We figure about 12 million people will need radiotherapy. If they all got access to it, this would save about 1 million lives a year. So you can see this means that if you want to buy shares in the linear accelerator companies, it wouldn't be a bad long-term investment. They need about 13,500 machines now, and about 21,000, nearly 22 by 2035. And of course we need all the staff that goes with it as well. This little map just distorts the countries by the number of patients who might need treatment. Not surprisingly, where you've got the biggest populations in places like China and India, you've got the greatest number of cases. So we can also look at the number of megavoltage machines per 1,000 cancer cases. You might, if you live in this esoteric world, hear a benchmark of needing so many machines per million population. Bernard's probably the only person who gets involved in this type of international benchmarking, but people will say you need 1 machine per million. In fact, because the number of cancers per million varies something like 8-fold, from 50 per 100,000 to nearly 450 in Australia. We have probably one of the world's highest cancer incidences. The actual number of cases you need varies a lot from country to country. You can't use population. You can look at the number of cases per 1,000, number of machines per 1,000 cancer cases. You probably need 2 machines for every 1,000 cancer cases, something like that. This just shows you the gross national income. So the lowest gross national incomes of people in the red, they're less than 10,000 US per year per person. Sorry, even lower than 10,000 is in fact, above 10,000 US per person is considered high income. I don't think I paid Professor Gunning's wine bill 10,000 US per year, probably not. So it's not a very high benchmark, but what you can see is that your access to cancer treatment, radiotherapy in particular, depends on the wealth of your country. So the question is, if we wanted to ramp up radiotherapy, I would say it's one of the most cost-effective cancer treatments that we have. What would be the cost and what would be the benefits? So that's what we looked at with this global task force. And we estimate that if you took a very efficient method of putting in just the most efficient equipment, sharing simulators, sharing stuff, it would cost about $97 billion by 2035. If you used our standard 2-machine model for a department, it would be about double that, 184 billion. But the return on investment would be the net return would be $280 billion. So this is a bit like the case that was made for HIV. What's the net return on providing cheap retrovirals in terms of lives saved and hospitalizations spared? And here, for access to cancer treatment, we estimate that it would be about $280 billion. So I just wanted to stop there. That's, will we need it? The answer is yes, we'll need a lot. And then talk in the next part about some new ways that we're looking at delivering it and potential new indications.
Good, thank you, Michael. Any questions on the first part of the talk there? Huge amount of work, obviously, in sort of quantifying all of that and just reassure people who are worried about their jobs. There are plenty of jobs. There may be in Mozambique, but there are.
Yeah, so I don't know much about this area, so I'll ask a very naive question. That is, I guess the title of the talk implies that there's some reason that radiotherapy would be reducing, and I suppose that might be the rising of other methodologies of treatment. Could you outline what the methodologies of treatment are that might start to impinge or not, like most closely into the area?
Well, this is an argument that's been made since just before the year I was born. And it was made that the cure for cancer was just around the corner, and therefore they shouldn't put a cobalt machine at Prince Alfred Hospital because the cure for cancer was around the corner, it was hormones. This argument was then made again with the advent of chemotherapy and with immunotherapy in the 90s, and then immunotherapy again more recently. I went to a program grant interview where the chairman of the program grant said, well, hopefully in 10 years' time we won't need radiotherapy. And someone else on his panel corrected him, not me. Unfortunately, we got the program grant. So this has been a constant. And there is a feeling that you can, first of all, that radiotherapy is expensive, which it isn't really. The equipment's not expensive. There's an initial capital cost, and there are some barriers. The main cost of radiotherapy, like the main cost of almost everything else, are the people that deliver it. The therapists, the physicists, the doctors, the nurses. This is where most of the costs come. So the cost of a linear accelerator, we spend every year on the staff to run that accelerator, basically. So there is a feeling about the cost, that it's too expensive. It's certainly not. And then there's a feeling that you can just substitute one treatment for another. And this is very rarely the case. So in prostate cancer, potentially, and perhaps in breast cancer, you can substitute lumpectomy with mastectomy. But nearly every other indication is what we call an irreplaceable benefit.
Just to give an international perspective on radiotherapy in one way, in the first edition of World Cancer Report, which actually did deal with modes of treatment, WHO, when they saw the draft, rejected any reference to linear accelerators and said they were only the prerogative of high-income countries. If I wanted to discuss radiotherapy, I should restrict myself to radiation sources in lead blocks, which were the only mode of treatment available in sub-Saharan Africa.
I must say, WHO has been the single most difficult international body for cancer treatment. And the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has done the most internationally to make cancer services of all sorts available. WHO is firmly set in the infectious diseases mould. They must be revelling in the current circumstances. But their cancer unit is about 2 people, 3 people, as you know better than me.
One last question.
Can you comment on potentially the other big, let's say, radiotherapy, especially the using of pharmaceuticals and therapeutic isotopes? Can you comment on the costs and on the applicability and in which way this may complement traditional therapy?
It's a fairly big question. So the question's about the role of radiopharmaceuticals. Obviously, they have a major role in diagnosis for therapy. They've mostly been used for the treatment of thyroid cancer, where they have a well-established role. There is a fair bit of exploratory work on conjugating radioisotopes with various antibodies and making more targeted treatments using everything from alpha particles to electrons. It doesn't have a large role in current practice, and I think it would be interesting to try and model what its future role would be. But not a large role at present.
Thank you. Thank you. We might move on to the next section now. That was a very, very interesting beginning. We're going to talk about MRI access,
Yes.
guidance,
So-
high-tech radiotherapy.
So we've gone from the low-tech of trying to provide cancer or radiotherapy for the whole world, and admittedly we started with a bar that's fairly low, very simple machines. I guess at the other end of things we would certainly like to progress the overall science, and for radiotherapy, image guidance has been a major benefit, and we've seen over the years the introduction of better ideas of where the tumour is, where the normal tissue is. So this picture here, which is on the left, is a woman being treated for breast cancer with one of the very early X-ray units. And then when I trained, I had to say it, when he trained, we used plain X-ray systems to work out where the X-ray beam should go, what normal tissues we want to avoid. In the 1990s, we introduced CT scanning because it gives us much better anatomical viewpoints, and it also gives us the electron densities of the tissue, so we can start to work out with greater precision what the X-ray dose is going to be. But clearly the thing to come is MRI, because of its better anatomical definition, but also, as I hope to show you, its opportunity to look at the way the function of tumours and normal tissues exists and the way it